Hello, and thank you all for gathering with us today for this very special salon with our dear friend, poet Nikki Finney. My name is Erica Huggins, and this is my partner, Lisbeth Tellefson, and we're so delighted that we are together at this time in our world in this way. So we have a few things to tell you, Lisbeth.
Um, First of all, I want to thank Parnisha and Emily from Northwestern University for handling the Zoom tech aspects of this call, not my forte. The chat panel at the bottom, and let us know where you're from. Nikki might not get to see all this right now, but we will be collecting comments and questions and doing a Q&A at the end so that Nikki can get to see some of that directly without being encumbered with all the busyness going on while she's doing her thing. I have known Nikki Finney going on 4 decades now. That's really astonishing to say. And it's probably been, 30 years since we lived in the same city. However, we have remained connected, and our strongest thread is a love of things archival and history. And as a fellow collector of history, we'll be shooting text back and forth. And even though I love all of her work, when I heard that her new book, Love Child's Hotbed of Poetry, contains poems and artifacts. It is archival in nature. You will see some of the images that are part of this just phenomenal tome this afternoon. And yeah, I could not be more proud of her. And I want to introduce the publisher of this book, who has been with Nikki since the jump. And she's also the editorial director of Northwestern University Press, Parnisha Jones. Where you at, girl? Where you at? Where you at?
Hi, Elizabeth. We're all obviously growing accustomed to this new world. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody, because we're seeing so many people right now, we have 83 and it changes 84. I'm watching the participant screen joining in, and I'm so grateful for that. And so I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. And so throughout the event, I think we should do this whole raise your hand if you can hear.
Can't see you though.
I can see everybody.
Okay.
Raise your hand if you can hear. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We have to do that in-depth quality control. So thank you very much, Elizabeth and Erica. This was something that we pulled together in light of so many different things that we've been going through. And I hope everyone is well and sheltered. At the same time, I want to thank Lisbeth and Erica for pulling this together for Nikki. And I want to thank them so much because they are a saving grace of so many different things that we're doing right now. And so many people who've had their events like just uprooted, their books uprooted in this time right now. And so I want to thank them so much for loving their friend of 30 plus years and putting together this salon, the saving grace of so many different things. I'm so grateful to everyone who is joining right now in this event tonight in such upheaval. I hope everyone is safe, well, and sheltered. I'm determined not to take up too much time, but I have some things I need to say. So you all logged in for the main event, obviously. But I do want to take time to thank Emily Dalton for being the thoughtful and secure head to help us put this together. I want to thank David Flores for this book and the previous book, for all you do to capture poets in moving picture shows. I want to thank the staff at Northwestern University Press for helping Nikki create a book that looks and feels like a long time ago, when books were intellectual property, art, and coveted. And I finally want to thank Nikki Finney. You and I have ridden this rodeo for the good part of 12 years, actually. We both had to trust Black woman poet, Black woman editor, for different reasons. And when, after being the mean and complicated editor that I am, insisted, you sent a FedEx box with a manuscript. I opened it, and it was like nothing I had ever seen. It was a literary jewelry box. It was a poetic jewelry box of so many things that you, Nikki, finally decided to share of yourself, but also give to the entire world, your actual heirs, as keepsakes. But little did you know I was actually prepared. I have written this rodeo with you again. I've learned to be prepared with you. The first book I acquired with Nikki for Northwestern was Head Off and Split almost 10 years ago. When you sent Head Off and Split, you sent something in a very cultivated and careful FedEx box that was like nothing I had actually ever seen. In this moment, when you have something so shiny and different, and more importantly, you, but it bears mentioning Head Off and Split and repeating, especially now, because we have to remember where we come from, and we have to remember how we arrived to this point. But now it's all about Love Child, the person and the book. They've both done something so special and so much more present. No one should make the mistake that Love Child is the absolute evolution of all the books you've done, Nikki, you have published, but it's something so different than all the rest, because it is the official Black woman, locked, literally dreadlocked, and loaded with poetry and history, and in conversation with so many things you have taken the time to know, and now know you don't have to play nice with. You don't have to compromise on your history to be seen, and in conversation with your work and the wider world that is so much, especially right now, needs to be seen. And this time, the whole process of this book and how we have to present it to the world in so unconventional, so ways that we didn't expect at this moment, is like nothing either of us have actually seen. But Nikki, for you, what is now finished and a printed artifact on the occasion when a Black woman gets to tell her unfiltered truth. Dear folks of the virtual world, please welcome Nikki Finney.
Thank you, Lisbeth. Thank you, Erica. And thank you all for coming. This is, I feel a little awkward. I'm just gonna say that to you. You know, for 30 years, I walked into a physical space, and one of the things that I love about that space is that the human bodies in that room are like a battery for me. And when I'm reading my work, I'm connected to you in a physical as well as a spiritual way. So I really have been thinking about this for a couple of weeks, that, you know, how was I going to look into that little green light and see and feel what I normally see and feel when I do a reading and talk about my work. And this is the first time I've done this. I don't hear your voices. I don't see your beautiful up close eyes, and I don't hear your, umbrellas falling or your shoes hitting something when I'm reading something, that I want you to listen to. So this is really very unusual and different. And in some ways, I really don't want to get used to it because I am a poet who loves the living and the live moment, and I want to stay there if I can for the duration. So, but I do appreciate your coming, and we're gonna attempt to do this. And this is very special that my friends and my publisher have set this up so beautifully. I'm deeply touched, and not in a virtual way, in a real way. So I want to also begin by mentioning, I'm not sure the video came across. I don't know if you could I don't know if those of you who got here in time heard the opening video, but I want to just thank Tamika Reed, who I think is one of those musicians and cellists who is changing the world of music with her own sound. And so if you didn't hear it, I couldn't hear it very clearly, but go to YouTube and just Google Tamika Reed, Nikki Finney. Parnisha brought us together at the Langston Hughes house in Harlem last fall, and David Flores shot it, and we shot it in one take, and it's a beautiful video. I almost forgot what I was there to do because I was listening so deeply to Tamika's playing. So it's a beautiful piece. And the poem that I'm reading in that piece is the Mother Emanuel and Miss Polly. Miss Polly is underneath the table, and so Tamika interprets that moment in just a stunning way. So I wanted to say something about that video. Love Child's hotbed of occasional poetry is a minglement. I call it that. A minglement of several things: photos, journal entries that stretch back over 50 years of my life. It's memoir, it's found artifacts that have been on my altar for a long, long time. Pieces of Jet and Ebony magazine that helped raise me in the blazing light of Black history. Archival pieces of the path of my journey to become a writer. There's a letter from my first editor in this book, a Kroger newspaper announcement of my first reading in my hometown, Sumter, South Carolina, aisle 5, in between the bread and the cheese. This minglement is carefully crafted also as what I label the linea negra of me, the dark line that runs from a pregnant woman's breastplate down to her yoni. More about that in a minute. But when you open the book, you see these artful pages and you see these artful lines line up. There's a beautiful, we won't see this on your screen, but I can show you perhaps on mine. The art director has taken the white space, and there are these lines on like 10 pages throughout the book that represent the linea negra. I also wanted to begin by talking about an epigraph that is at the front of the book. It's a Langston Hughes quote from a very important biography of Hughes by Faith Berry in 1983. And Hughes says this. He says, "I'm laying off political poetry for a while, though since the world situation methinks is too complicated for so simple an art, I am going back, indeed have gone back to nature, Negroes, and love," end quote. So if you know Langston Hughes, then you know his use of the word simple is never simple. And Berry goes on to tell the reader that the quote was found in a letter to his friend Louise Thompson in 1940. World War II was raging. Roosevelt had requested $900 million to buy 50,000 airplanes, and Hughes was telling his friend that he was weary of changing his lecture topics to fit the political and social agenda of the time. And thus, because of this weariness, he says, and I'm going to say this line one more time, "I am going back, indeed have gone back to nature, Negroes, and love." This blew me away when I found this quote. I'm an epigraph girl for sure. I feel that epigraphs are a kind of stained glass window for the work. I love using them in the construction of single poems and also books of poetry. I love how when they are right as rain, they slant and break open the light of whatever I'm working on. So I love how in 1940, Langston Hughes' quote became the spine of this book, Love Child's Hotbed of Occasional Poetry in 2020. So keep in mind as I'm reading that nature, Negroes, and love are indeed what Love Child's poems are all about. I have spent a lot of time thinking about the love that we as Black people never get credit for holding on to. The love that has kept us alive despite the 400-year-old action plan to eradicate Black life and culture. Of course, I speak of the parts that could not be marketed and packaged and sold, the love that Black people always had and kept for each other that could not stop the brutal beating of 14-year-old Emmett Till, could not stop the tying of a 75-pound cotton fan around this brutally beaten 14-year-old's body. But absolutely the love that managed to lift the face of the mother in order to open the casket and show the world that unforgettable image of her son after his body was removed from the bottom of the lake. The love she had for us, the love she had for him, is the iron ore Black love that lives above the pain that follows our history in this country. So the image you are about to see, the first image, is a found photograph of a Black woman from possibly the 1920s, maybe the 1930s. I surmise this because of her outfit and the furniture around her. I found it in an antique shop in Lexington, Kentucky. When I found it, it was in a cheap metal frame and the piece of glass was stuck to her maxi-length coat. There you see it. I have this old thing about old pictures of Black folk. I feel the need to bring them home or give them another home. It feels like an act of old love every time I do this. I look at her and I see another love child from another time, someone who knew and understood the power of Black love. It has less to do with her great coat and more to do with her great spine as she stands there. She is one of the generations of us shortly after slavery. Her face says she has some age on her, and I wanted to give her anonymous life a place at the front of this book. After the opening poem that concerns itself with one of the millions of moments when they separated Black people, Black children, Black families indiscriminately, heartlessly, then you see and turn to this great mother who is peering out from underneath a Sandra Bland quote from 2014, where she says, "Good morning, my beautiful kings and queens." And this page is directly across from another page with a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. We're not going to show that one, but trust me, it's there, from 1844, who in his poetic treatise against slavery said, quote, "The sugar they raised was excellent. Nobody could taste the blood in it," end quote. In my love child mind, I see these two quotes and this one photograph as being deeply related to each other, even though the quotes were made 170 years apart and the photograph anonymous. We can talk about this some more at the end during the Q&A. I want to read you the opening poem in the book, just an excerpt. We don't really have time. I'm kind of long-winded, as some of you know. And but I did want you to know that I don't really do anything without first thanking the people who got me here. And these particular folks I see as being separated one from another in this moment, in this fictive but not fictive moment. Auction block of Negro weather. The eye wall was human. Black skin could not take off running from this swell and surge convergence. Legal tender built and brewed this storm into a quick moving cell of half whispered goodbyes. Twisting outstretched arms, a father's wailing mouth turned up to the night sky was forever. A mother's eyes sunk below the county's waterline, world without end. One 3x3 vortex of epic ongoing drowning. Forests of human oak raised by the zephyr force winds of banknotes. Family trees broken leaf by leaf by leaf, scattered by the winds of profit, 10 million fingers and toes divvied up for chicken change. No hats or scarves or wings issued for the highly skilled wearing black skin. Beloveds, the elements, out in the elements, low tide, lightning strikes touching the ground where they stood, waiting, screams pushing the air unmeasured, 6 million eyes and arms in whirling disbelief, unraveling from each other. High tide, goodbye, lovey. A deluge of superwind made by the mouths of children being sucked away. Women open like bank vaults, their gold coins snatched. Jerome is made to bare his teeth. Boy and girl twins pull north and south. Sweet fruit on a stem, hope ground into a powder, later worn around the neck for good luck. And so that's the opening poem of this collection. And I wanted to go from there to talk about the title and the title of the book. I have a thing about titles. I love titles. And there's a section in a journal of mine, book of mine, two books back, where I'm really struggling to try to find out what I want to call this book. And I realized that I wanted to call it Love Child. And my father named me Love Child. In fact, the cover of the book has my father's handwriting. This is my father's handwriting here. The publisher surprised me with that, Marianne Jankowski, when we had decided what the book, how it would look, but she didn't tell me that she was going to put Daddy's handwriting on the cover. And that was, the book was already very personal, and it just took it to an entirely different level. But this was a private name for me from him, and there was a reason for that. It was, as I found out later on in my life, protection from the world. He saw something in me from the start that I was not conscious of. I was too small, but he saw it, he believed it, he nurtured it. It was a slower way of moving through the world, and he protected that in me for as long as he could. My spirit was quirky. In the title poem, La Nea Negra, the story is told of how he allowed me he would come by and pick me up after school, and he would say, "You want to get in your spot?" And I would lie back in his Buick window, and we would tool around town going about 20 miles per hour through parks and places. And he would put down his window and light his Salem 100 cigarette. And then he would say, looking through the rear view, he would say, "Love Child, what do you see way up there at the top of the trees?" And so in this moment, I found so much permission to be my quirky self then and now. And so when I realized what I wanted this book to be about, I realized it had to have the name Love Child at the heart of it. The next image you're about to see is a Post-it note from my father that's in the book. It's a simple message. It says, as soon as it pops up there, it says, "Love Child, go to work. I need you." Dad, he always called himself La Fox. And so he signs his name on in many of the notes in the book 3 or 4 different ways. And this was sent to me when I was writing my second book of poetry, Rice, in the mid-1980s. His notes and letters continued throughout my life until he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2013. He would send them to me from his little back office in Sumter, South Carolina, or from the high bench of the Supreme Court. I began to get the idea to include some of them in this book after one night of trying to read them all and realizing that his beautiful handwriting missives were a kind of encyclopedia of my father's love that perhaps someone else in the world needed to be reminded of as well. And so if you would leave that up, maybe, Emily, while I read this. This is one page. This is a hotbed that's in the book, Hotbed 85. And this is when this was near the end of his life, and my mother and I had begun to take him to the hospital. And this was for something that, if anybody ever has a parent or an older person who's beginning to not to be able to eat what they normally eat. His ability to swallow has left Earth. Mama and I are squeezed inside one chair meant for 2 inside the tiny room behind the swallowing monitor on the 3rd floor of the hospital. We are being saved from the radiation being used in order to look inside Daddy's throat. A monitor in front of us allows us to see the test as it happens. His swallowing has gotten more difficult these last several weeks. We are here to witness the great swallowing test that will tell all. It is the test that can save him from pneumonia, but also take away the last human pleasure his body will ever know. The test is divided into applesauce, Jell-O, honey, a cracker, a sip of water. Daddy doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't know any of the strangers who are trying to help him. I can feel him feeling lost. The top of my father's spine suddenly pops into the screen. My mother gasps as if she has never seen him this naked before. I am watching the full anatomy of Daddy's throat unfold like a movie on the monitor. It is like watching a puppet show. There are so many tiny marionette strings involved. Swallowing has a rhythm and is a production. There is stage right and left. One action releases another action. They want to see if the foods he regularly eats are going down and landing where they should. My eye is on the Jell-O, waiting at the top of his tongue, like an Olympic diver on the high board. He looks around the room for anything familiar. I wave so he will know he is not alone. He waves back when he sees me. Swallow, Daddy, swallow. I touch my own throat and make a swallowing motion to try and translate what my words don't seem to be relaying. But the squared red diver on the high board has forgotten all his training, how to tuck and roll his legs, how to leap into the precious air of the esophagus. Thank you, Emily, for posting that. Hotbeds. So when you open the book, you see these things that are, you look at this and you say, what in the world is that? You see they're kind of labeled hotbeds. They have this beautiful box up in the corner. And a hotbed is what we persnickety gardeners do to get our plants, our spinach, our kale, our orchids going strong. We plant the seed somewhere or the seedling, and we place the lights above it and give it the food it needs to grow. And there are small embedded light-filled growing things in this book, I would like to think, that wind around, unfold slowly, and are the essential business of the book. These embedded things become larger intersections that are sometimes literal, but sometimes figurative, and they represent that ongoing linea negra line that I already mentioned to you. The image you are about to see is a photo of my grandmother, my mother's mother, Beulah Lenora Butler Davenport. Please don't miss the safety pin she is wearing like a diamond pendant. When Mommy got dressed every single day except Sunday, she would brush her teeth, lotion up, and then place her safety pin always on the front of her blouse. Her ritual, this was her ritual. She knew she would have to mend something, hold something or someone together at some point during her day. She was and remains my closest critical human connection between the living and the dead, of who and whose I am. There is a hotbed that comes up after this photograph, which speaks of her safety pin, what I call her safety pin brooch. I'm not going to tell you which one it is. Yes, this book has a little crossword puzzle intentionality. So let me know if you find it. Shoot me a note at nikkifinney@gmail.com because it's embedded and there are a lot of those things that are in the book. Thanks, Emily. The next image.
I kind of got the impression that Greg doesn't quite grasp the severity of it.
Sorry, folks. Welcome to the virtual world. Nikki, unmute yourself, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. I was gonna listen in. I thought it was some juicy stuff going on, but I guess I better get back to doing what I came here to do. So Emily, if you would pull up this next, no, it's the Pullman Porter. Just past it. Yep, yep. Pullman Porter, the next one. Yep. Great, perfect, thank you. The next image is a Pullman Porter conductor's hat that I bought in the early 1980s. I grew up in a housing community which often spoke of the Black Pullman conductors on the segregated trains of the 1890s, the 1920s, and 1940s. So many stories of these methodical, protective Black men who would take great care helping Black children who were put on the trains from the South, moving to the North to escape the violence there and to live with family until parents could come up North and get away themselves. I always felt these men were great guardians working and riding that train. And so this image sits across from Hotbed 58, which I wanted to read to you. And I will not explain this one. I'll just read it. And in the end, when we talk about, when we have Q&A, maybe you can, maybe you will tell me if you picked up what I was talking about. So here we go. Thanks, Emily. It's December in Sweden, and I've come to pick up Miss Morrison from the Nobel banquet at Stockholm City Hall. I'm driving the wash and waxed black limo. I have on my vintage Pullman Porter hat. My locks are tucked tight under the rim of the 50-year-old brim. She won't recognize me. She won't remember our meeting many years ago when I stood in a very long line waiting for her to sign my hot off the press copy of Song of Solomon. I had my first book on wings made of gauze hiding under my arm as a gift. I wanted to show her evidence of what her words had helped me realize. An hour later, when I finally reached her, she stared at the front of the book for a minute, then turned it over, a startling black and white photo stretched from top to bottom. She looked from the photo back to me. "Look at you," she said, then added, "You working?" Her statement was Black woman familiar, something one of my aunts might have said to encourage audacity. It was the question that startled me. Had I been waiting for a compliment and not a question about devotion? I never answered her. The bookstore assistant pushed me along, welcoming the next reader in line. I have kept that moment and the question over my desk for the last 30 years. The city hall doorman brings me back to the streets of Stockholm. When he opens the car door for Miss Morrison, the ceiling light pops on and he helps her into the dark back. Of course, because she is who she is, she notices everything. My poking out locks, the cool, nicely visible Pullman seal on the front of the hat. She seems to be staring at its reflection in the rearview mirror. "Nice hat," she says, without giving comment about the wayward lock. "Thank you." The limo driver's training course said not to speak unless spoken to. I don't look her way. I've been practicing playing it cool for weeks. She calls Lois on her new Nokia 100, the latest in 1993 mobile phone technology. I've never seen one before. Of course, Miss Morrison would have one of the first. She raises the phone to her beautiful Howard University dramaturge lips and leans back into the back seat like a woman who knows good leather from bad, like a woman who has just won the Nobel Prize in literature and left nothing worth hearing unsaid for the moment. She's relaxed and staring out the window into the world she owns. I can tell she's tired of Swedes and caviar and just wants to get back to her Hudson River drive. I say nothing and ease away from the traffic light into the starry, frigid Stockholm night.
Indigo blue
I want
one,
to open,
all lowercase, number one.
I want to open my mouth and tell her the backstory about quitting my job and buying a ticket to Sweden and applying for this part-time job in order to drive her wherever she wants to go while she is in Stockholm to receive the greatest literary award in the world. But not even Toni Morrison would believe my long Afro-Galaxy story that is absolutely true. I try to use only the side mirrors to see what I need to see and get us where we need to go. Because if she notices me looking at her in the rear view, she'll know I'm a fraud. First, she'll see the river banking in my eyes, and next, the ocean gathering in my face, the deep water of how grateful I am. I am here in Stockholm because I want to thank her for writing the books she needed to read and for making more than one copy. I don't want her to see or ask me any questions about the journal book I have open and on the front seat. I don't want her to ask what a Black woman with locks is doing driving a limo in Stockholm 2 weeks before Christmas, one night after the sacred night of her Nobel Prize award. A coincidence? Hardly. You know how she likes to follow her questions out backwards all the way to the end, right? Red light. What a great Black woman laugh she has. Lois must have said something Lorraine, Ohio, crazy. Miss Morrison's laugh could make a Black man wearing blue silk take flight off the top of a hospital building and not look down. She tells Lois to hold on a minute, covers the speaker holes in the funny shaped phone with her writing hand that sparkles with a one-of-a-kind blue sapphire. Well, look at you, Miss Pullman Porter, she says. All these years and you still haven't answered my question. Haven't you heard how I don't like to repeat myself? Okay, maybe just once. You working?
Thank you, Nikki. This is Parnisha. We're doing a little just in interruption during the event because so many people are trying to join right now, so they haven't necessarily put themselves on mute. So that's what you're hearing, but we're getting that collected right now. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. The third thing I want to talk about, there are 4 things I want to talk about. The third thing I want to talk about is occasional poetry. Occasional poetry is poetry basically written for a special occasion. Weddings, funerals, births are sort of the traditional mode of operation for these. There's a long formal tradition of occasional poetry writing, Greek and Roman culture. But I didn't know about Greek and Roman culture when I was growing up, when I was 12 and 13 and growing up in Sumter, South Carolina. And someone would come up to me and ask me if I could write a poem for Mrs. Robinson's, 60th birthday. And that was my job as a young poet in the community. So the book, I have continued to be asked to write poems for occasions, and the book is filled with those kinds of poems I was asked or commissioned to write. The image you're about to see is my father just graduated from law school in South Carolina. My father was just recruited from out of law school, kind of like a modern day basketball player, I used to tell him, to Sumter, South Carolina. And there we go. Yep. The town I grew up in the mid 60s, where Black college students were putting their bodies and lives in between racism and the future. The cameo you see that I made in the middle of his forehead is the only photo I've ever seen of my father as a young boy. He is with one of his aunts. His mother died giving birth to him. That's another story, and that's another poem called The Afterbirth, 1931, which is in one of my first books. My journal books are filled with collages of different things, and this is one that I pulled out for this particular book. Hotbeds, taking seed for a poem to come. This is how I work. This is the heart of my process. I remember thinking when I first saw this photo that Daddy, looks so serious and determined even at 23. So I took a pen and I wrote these words around his head. It says, future, lone, dissenter, death penalty vote, 1973. My father's fight against the death penalty in South Carolina was pretty legendary and a major background visual for my early years on Earth. Fast forward 50 years or so, and I was invited by the University of Arizona to participate in their 2-year Art for Justice project funded by the Ford Foundation. And there was this poem that had been moving around inside of me for a long, long while. It was a story of George J. Stinney, who at 14 was the youngest person ever killed in the electric chair in this country in 1944. I wanted to explore what possible connections there might be between Stinney, who was murdered by the state, and my father, who 40 years later became the first Black Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court. The poem is a long one, even for me. I think it's like 20 plus pages. I've marked some excerpts to read for you now so you can get a sense of what this poem sort of tries to do. I hope it does. Thank you, Emily, for posting that. Before I read a little bit, this is the mugshot that is on the opposite side of the poem, and it's if you Google George J. Stinney Jr., this shot will come up, and it's a side shot of him and a front shot of him with his number 260 underneath. But I looked up the report, the prison report, and you'll hear some of those details in this. Black boy with cow, a still life. And then there's an epigraph, because I told you I was an epigraph girl. It says, still life can be a celebration of material pleasures such as food and wine, or often a warning of the ephemerality of these pleasures and the brevity of human life. And that's a definition of still life from the Tate galleries. We stand before the bowl of his eyes, no fruit in the picture. The curve and curl of his desires waiting to be filled. He looks sideways at us. We could fill his bowl with hundreds of his black boy sketches, airplanes, automobiles. At the very least, we could fill it with his cow, with his penitentiary record. George J. Stinney Jr., age 14, height 5 feet, weight 95 pounds, hair Negro, eyes dark maroon, home Alcaloo, rural South Carolina. In 1944, there are Black churches and white churches, Black schools, white girls, Black boys. There are railroad tracks. There are always railroad tracks when there are white girls and Black boys living 200 feet from each other. This is the Jim Crow South. This is the still life of George J. Stinney Jr. of Alcaloo, Thursday, March 23rd, 1944. 2 girls, white, were last seen on one bike out looking for maypops. Friday, March 24th, 1944. 2 bodies of 2 girls, Betty June Binnicker, 11, Mary Emma Thames, 7, are found side by side on their backs in 3 inches of water. The bike they were riding the day before has been laid across their bodies like a paperweight. A report comes in. George Junius Stinney Jr., 14, is the last person to see the girls. Does this mean last to look at the girls who were out looking for maypops and stop to ask where they were? The census of the Jim Crow South does show there were mystics alive in 1944, white people who saw things that Black people did not. And then we move over to, he's suspected and then he's arrested. And Amy, his sister, sees the men come into their house. Amy, George's youngest sister, sees the men and runs to hide in the chicken coop surrounded by warm eggs and cackling hens. She watches as George's drawing hands are handcuffed. She sees the men who live on the other side of the tracks walk her brother outside and put him in the back of the extra long Black car, sees their guns and billy clubs, sees that she has accidentally broken some of the eggs her family needs to live. So George is arrested and charged with capital murder, taken to jail, given a 10-minute trial, and found guilty and sentenced to death. In 1944, a reporter from the state newspaper in South Carolina wrote that George J. Stinney Jr. was walked to his death with a Bible underneath his arm. He reported that the 14-year-old was orderly, polite, obeying the men from the other side of the tracks without incident. Did he walk like a boy back in school, headed to the library to return a book? He reported that George J. Stinney Jr. was made to sit on the Bible that he was made to carry into the death chamber. The electric chair was made for men, and George was just a boy with a mother, a father, 2 sisters, 2 brothers, and 1 cow waiting for him back home. The reporter reported that the guards had great difficulty strapping the small 14-year-old into the chair. He later reports the electrodes were too big for George's legs. When the switch is flipped the first time, 2,400 volts of man-made electricity cause an earthquake, man-sized convulsions shake and roll, knocking the large mask off his boy-sized head, exposing his tearful face, singeing his Negro hair, sending his maroon eyes all the way to the back of his skull. 2 more jolts of 2,400 volts of electricity take 4 more minutes to run their slow lightning storm and Category 7 hurricane through his empty bowl of a body before the boy who loved to draw flying things and long-winged cars is pronounced dead, his still life over. The air fills with hot comb hair and black boy skin. And then the second part of this very long poem talks about George Stinney's family asking the state of South Carolina in 2014 for writ of coram nobis. Coram nobis is when the state says they made a mistake. And at that point, that's all they wanted in order to clear George's name. They wanted the state of South Carolina to say they made a mistake. And so I go to the trial, which is in my home of Sumter, South Carolina, and I attend the trial all week. And this is me reporting on what I saw there. And this is the end of this section, this second section. The state not only murders the 14-year-old sitting on the Bible, but smokes the whole family. There is a bolt of long-range electricity shot through the mother, the father, the brother, the shadow of the sister, the cow. There was no evidence. There was only a country's top 10 hit memorized by heart and whistled into soda and beer cans. The people who lied have now died. The man who killed the girls who was never looked for is dead now too. People with Negro hair and maroon eyes still wait every day for anybody who killed or kidnapped one of their own to die first so the truth can finally come out. A writ of coram nobis is the best we can get, they say. The court adjourns and the maverick judge announces her decision, and we are supposed to be delighted by her 21st century courage. The conviction is overturned and the family agrees to sit for a family portrait 70 years after the fact. The camera shows that everybody is missing. The mother with Negro hair keeps looking around for her boy. She herringbones his empty chair with her arm. The sister says they are happy that her brother's name has finally been cleared. She is 80 years old now and can die. There is a fine alabaster powder on all of our hands as we keep holding on. He will never disappear from our bowl. The boy who kept looking behind him in the courtroom that day, looking for his father to walk in the door, touch his shoulder, take him home, is our son with soft brown cow eyes. And his short-lived life will always be the story of a boy who arrived to the great land of fast wheels, shiny fenders, and plentiful wings, and was burned alive. It's a long poem. Anyway, we can talk about that some too. The last thing I want to tell you about this book is The Art of Letters, how the ephemera in the book weighs in. My house and life, Lisbeth can attest to this, is rich or clunky with ephemera. I always thought as a young person, as a writer, I thought nobody would map out my life, and I wanted to map out my life. And this book is my attempt to do that up to a certain point. The image that you are about to see is a letter that I wrote to my mother in July of 1968. I was 11 years old and my mother was leaving home, and our nuclear family for the first time was going off. She was going off to Tuskegee Institute to acquire a summer teaching certificate in early childhood education. She already had her master's degree and she wanted to keep learning. Please don't miss that this letter, with many 11-year-old writing mistakes, was written on what was at the time my favorite writing paper. Oh yes, there is a favorite writing paper. Lime green, as you can see, it's very lime green. Stationery, let's just say with a floral theme, okay? This is the moment in my life when I remember falling in love with paper, a love I would later share with my father, even though we wouldn't get to talk about it too much. Please don't miss the fact that I signed the letter not with my own last name, but with my mother's maiden name. 11 years old, I guess I was an early womanist in training. This is one of those embedded lights, and I want to read this to you. If you can put maybe the other one up first. Yep. Dear Mom, July 5th, 1968. I hope you're having a wonderful time down there. All of us miss you very much. I have some bad news for you. Jerry broke your car light with the hammer. Jerry's my little 4-year-old brother. But just one, I say. Mrs. Davis gives her love. Hope you don't get too lonely down there. You received a big package from your class. Mother, please write me and not Daddy. You have received a lot of mail. I hope you have a package for me. Hey, I wrote a poem for you. It's kind of crazy. When you get old and out of shape, remember girdles are $2.98. Ha ha, I say. I have decided my birthday present is a watch and a set of perfume. Who's your roommate? How old is she? Is she nice? Is she fat? Is she skinny? Does she snore? What's her name? All for now. Please write me back. All my love, Lynn Davenport. We're going to just go through these and we can talk about them. Thank you, Emily. The next image and piece of ephemera that I'd like to share with you is a piece of indigo cloth from the 1960s. This is a piece I've always been fascinated with, just personally. And I'm a girl who was born by the sea, and this fabric holds hand-drawn images of sea creatures through the imagination of Nigerian women in the 60s. So I took a photo of that cloth and above it placed a quote that a stranger on a plane once turned and said to me. He just sat down right next to me. I just sat down on the plane. We smiled at each other and he said, you know, before the age of propellers, blue whales could communicate pole to pole, and now they can't hear each other. It was his way of saying hello and trying to figure out who I was, and the gift had landed before the plane had taken off. I immediately scribbled down what he said, transferred it to my great epigraph book. It mattered deeply to me, and I've thought about it for many years. So I knew I would use it one day in a poem or a book. And this is how I have always met strangers in my life. This is how I've always made poetry in my life. We talked for the rest of the flight as if we had known each other all of our lives. He was a writer of an echo blog called Walking the Berkshires. His name is Timothy Abbott. And he remains one of the most beautiful writers of the natural world that I know. Thank you, Emily. So this odd, curious book treasures the epistolary and the visual side by side. Some missives came on Post-it notes, as you've already seen, and others came on Daddy's official court letterhead stationery. Daddy's letters and those of my mother taught me to treasure and hold the writing of a letter to be a sacred act. In this day and age of canceling classes for young people, to not teach them cursive handwriting makes me scream out the beauty of letter writing and the beauty of handwriting more and more and more. So this last piece of ephemera that will take us into our Q&A, I have to share with you, is one of Daddy's letters that he wrote. My father rarely dated any of his letters for some reason. So the image you're about to see is one of the most treasured letters that I have of his, because it also shows his wonderful sense of humor, which he didn't let a lot of people see. Sweet darling, you are the best writer I know and the world's greatest con artist alive. I love you anyway. Love, Papa, Dad, La Fox. In Love Child, I wanted to explore my old love for the visual alongside my old love for the metaphorical, alongside my old love for history and my old love for truth and my fierce love for nature, Negroes, and for love itself. So thank you for listening. And I just want to say one more time, thank you, Emily. You can take that up. Lisbeth, Erica, 10,000 thank yous for reaching out to your community in such a personal way for me to launch Love Child tonight, officially launching tomorrow. Parnisha, Emily, Nup, team, you said yes, you said yes, you said yes. I'm so grateful. I want to also thank Brian Fry and the team at Blood Orange Review. I think Parnisha is going to tell you a little bit more about that. But these folks, I am touched and deeply They're going to do something to help launch the book this week that I don't know. I lose my voice and my words when I look at everything that they are doing. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, all of you. 111, I see the number. That's really crazy. To come out tonight and to spend this night doing this virtual launch, what I certainly didn't know how to do. And I just appreciate, I think I did hear a few feet moving. I think I heard some whispering. I think I heard a few maybe sips of red vino. Oh, no, I didn't hear that. But I am really glad you are here. I would just, let me just say this. After the poet gets the word down on the page, the person coming into the room, be it one room or 111 rooms, is the next most precious thing there is. And so I am just so grateful that you took some time out to spend an hour with us tonight. And maybe you can help us get the word out in the world about this book that means so much to me. So thank you. I think we're going to, for the next 3 minutes, you're going to watch the second video we've made for the book. And it features a young poet from Brooklyn, beautiful sister named Alondra Uribe, and myself in another David Flores Love Child video. And David is just a remarkable cameraman and a remarkable seer of things. And it's called The Elevator Girl, and it's an homage to my mother, who wanted desperately to leave the South when she was 19 and see what the big city was like. So watch that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Going up, watch your step. 4th floor, 2nd floor, mezzanine. Anybody going up?
Going up? Mama was the elevator girl at Montgomery Ward's in Trenton, New Jersey, summer of 1952. This was the Newberry girl's work day of questions. She was 19 with 4 things to say on her new job. Going up. Her first trip out of the black and white, bloody South to see the sights of the rest of the world. Her movement in the Northland would be more vertical and less horizontal. Watch your step. Her warning to all who entered her steel capsule, there on her silver stool with 3 buttons to push all day long, listening to the chitter-chatter of white folks behind her. There on her stool, the country girl decides to lose her southern accent and take on the sound of chic northerners riding and buzzing just inches away. Newberry girl, size 2 dress, size 10 shoe, bony and long, her rail-thin black girl body, once a good size for slipping down the cotton row back home, and now a good size for sitting on the elevator stool up north. Long, colored girl fingers made for picking and pushing the cotton of the South, now cello playing the Art Deco buttons of the North in her newest department store, lift, voice. 4th floor, 2nd floor, mezzanine. Anybody going up?
Thank you all so much. We're going to turn it over to Lisbeth and Erica. I saw so many clapping, cheering, toasting, so many different things. And so we're going to turn over to Lisbeth and Erica to do the Q&A. You all can continue to enter your questions through the chat feature. And Lisbeth and Erica are going to go through the questions, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. We're not going to get through everything, but thank you all for being here. It's amazing. So Lisbeth, Erica, I'm ready to turn it over.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay.
Well, we're not on screen right now, but Nikki,
Yes.
I just want to thank you. That was so heartfelt, so precious, so familiar. Your history is familiar to so many of us on this gathering. And I wanted to just share 3 comments without the names of those who said them. My soul is happy. I needed that poem. Powerful. So you'll see more. And now we have
Cynthia.
a question from Cynthia. And this will be the first one. Nikki, I love how your parents are made real and multidimensional in your work. Do your siblings show up in your work?
My siblings show, my 2 brothers, I have a brother who's 18 months older than me and 8 years, there's another one 8 years younger than me. They do show up. They usually don't, so in some ways there are primary roles if we're, if something happens, but I'm very clear that because I take a lot from my family, because that's the palette and that's, what I know, I'm very careful about that. And some of that, I think you have to wade in with some sort of permission. So they show up emotionally a lot, but I don't always bring them forward without thinking about, would this person, my brother, like to be brought forward? So it's a balancing act all the time. I feel much more comfortable bringing forward my mother and my father because of the direct line of influence, I think, more than anything else. So yes, they do show up. They do.
Thank
Probably they don't want to, but they do.
Thank you. So here's another one from Teresa. Nikki, thank you.
You're welcome.
Here's my question. Before some of the poems, there is this preface: on the occasion of swimming with a pencil behind my ear into a picture of. Can you tell us about this preface?
Yes, there are 4 poems in the collection that are ekphrastic poems taken from an exhibit that was first in Charleston, at the College of Charleston. It's called Southbound. And there were 4 photographs that I was asked to write a poem for, an occasional poem for this photograph. And so I wanted to somehow get those 4 in a set in some sort of way. So each of those have the same beginning, same epigraph beginning, to make sure that was a cat, to make sure that to make sure that that they come together. So when you look at those 4, you'll know, and if you use the credits in the back of the book, which are beautifully done, you can see that those 4 poems were first in that exhibit called Southbound. And that's the pencil behind my ear, that's looking at the photograph, that's swimming into the photograph to be able to say what I wanted to say about them ekphrastically.
Thank you so much.
Nzinga.
The next question is from Nzinga. If I was at this reading in person, I would gather the gumption to ask you if you have a current favorite book by a Black woman that I can share online. So no, this is not in person. But yes, do you have a favorite book to recommend?
I'm reading right now Girl, Woman, Other. And
Bye. Oops, sorry.
It's okay. We can find it.
Black British woman. Somebody knows that they're going to send it out right now. Bernadine Evaristo. Thank you.
That's right.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I would recommend that that book because I'm in the middle of it.
Oh, great.
JP Howard.
So JP Howard has a question.
Hi, JP Howard.
Can you talk about the importance of using archival family memorabilia and the process for you of including those items in this collection? Maybe some insight into the process for you. Also, thank you for the amazing reading.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the amazing salons you've been hosting up that way. And I just want to say, this was a mountain for me because I am surrounded by archival material on my life. I don't always and often think and want to use that material for my next book, as it shows, you know, this is the first time I've really done this in this way. But I think being the age that I am, I think that walking the path that I have walked, I really have always understood that if we don't save our own material, nobody will. And so I have been doing that since I was 15. I have boxes and boxes and boxes of things that I treasure. Oh, this is a treasured note from my teacher, or a treasured note from my mother, or my mother wrote me hundreds of letters as I was growing up. In each letter, there is a piece of newspaper or Ebony magazine or Jet magazine where she cut out something about, Althea Gibson or some Black hero. She tucked it into the letter. And so I have all these letters from her with these pieces of paper of Black history, and they're all together. And I look at those hundreds of letters and I was like, she was constantly telling me, you come from these people. You don't believe that other stuff. You come from these kind of folks. And so it was really important for me to make my culture clothes, to make my armor, to make to surround myself with the true history and not the false history that I was being told and when I walked out of my house. And so this is what I wanted to do, not so much elaborate and turn the light on my family. My family is just one of 10 million other Black families that has the same kind of materials or not, right? Different levels of different kinds of things, but different things that we treasured that I really believe we should spend more time honoring, because it tells the story of how we got here, how we made it through, and what else do we hold on to as the next generation comes forward, if not stories and books made of our skin, our photographs, the things we got wrong and the things we did right. We have to tell those stories as Black writers.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question, and I think we have 2-3 more. How did your parents, this is from Jacqueline Brown.
Hey, Jackie.
How did your parents respond to your desire to become a poet? And speak to the would-be poets.
Well, to tell you the truth, my parents thought that this was a frivolous hobby, like they were very supportive, but okay, so you like to, scribble, when you gonna get your real job? And that continued and continued until I had a book. And when I brought a book home, it's kind of like that thing that I wrote about Miss Morrison, you look at Miss Morrison, turned the book over and she said, "Look at you." And I was like, oh yeah, look at me, and it's like they take you they took me more seriously, and they understood that I wasn't playing about this thing. And slow by slow, the more you invite them to your poetry reading and sit them in the front row and tell them thank you for all the things they did. I mean, it took a long time. It really did. But I was determined. They saw that I was determined. And my father kept trying to get me to go to law school. My father kept saying, you're the writer. You have the best, connection to language and the writer. you need to go to law school. And I would go, no, I need to be a poet. And so we would have these great fights, father-daughter fights about that. And I don't think he ever gave up his desire to see me go to law school. And I just told him, Daddy, it's a different kind of justice work. So
Yes.
Ooh,
Beautiful,
right.
beautiful. Thank you. So we have one from Erin Washington from Alabama. How does the country girl not lose her dialect while being in the world? From an Alabama sister.
how does the country girl not lose? Like, she has to be intentional. I have a friend in Kentucky who has a deep Kentucky drawl. And she says, I mean, like that poem about my mother being the elevator girl, my mother wanted to lose her Southern accent. So she was intentional about, I don't want you to know where I'm from. So I'm going to lose this. I'm going to listen to the people, the white folks behind me getting on the elevator. I'm going to imitate the way they talk. But I know folks who hold on to their dialect with both hands and the voice, because it reminds them of how their mother sounds and their grandmother sounds and the people. And they are intentional about, I will not change how I sound because of your thinking I'm from a place that, you know, is inferior in some sort of way. So I think you have to be intentional about it. And I think you have to be a love child about your language and the way you sound and the way and who you come from. And, you know, throw that language in the face of power and friends. And if somebody teases you, you know, do the twirl and swirl and keep trucking. But it has to be an intentional act, as is the intentional act of, you know, talking about your auntie and talking about, you know, people in your family who were true heroes to your family and not just keep them hidden. I mean, Lucille Clifton helped me tremendously when I was a young poet, pull my ancestors forward. When I read Generations, done, over. I was like, you can do that? You can put photographs of your people next to Walt Whitman in a book, a memoir, I said, oh, okay, let's go. Let's do this.
Last question.
You're amazing, Nikki Finney. The next question, and I think is the last one. This is from Valerie Boyd.
Hey, Valerie.
She says, hi, Nikki. Is the Toni Morrison in Sweden story literally true? How did you land that job? Tell us more about the story behind the story. And finally, you working?
Only Valerie Boyd would ask me if the Toni Morrison story was true. And Valerie Boyd, I'm not answering that question.
Okay.
No, but I just want you to know, everything in that story is true. The fact that she asked me that when I met her, the fact that she asked me, was I working? So there's a little turn to the story. The second time I saw her was a year before she passed. And she was on tour with her last book, I think it was Love. And I walked up to her table to get that one like I had done all the other books. Mm-hmm. And she looked up from you give it to the person and you have to give them your name. And she said, what's your name? And I said, Nikki Finney. And Toni Morrison looked up at me and she said, the first time I did this, she didn't know who I was. The second time she knew who I was and she looked right at me and she said, you working? And it took my breath away. I said, anytime I get off track, anytime I get lazy, I think about Toni Morrison asking me that question. And so, no, I did not go pick her up after the Nobel Awards, but I would have.
Thank you, Nikki, for answering the questions. Even the questions that were not asked, you may have answered.
Yes.
Yeah, we apologize to those we couldn't get to, but there's something very important we wanted to say before you go. Nikki's new book is being released tomorrow, and part of this event was really to try and figure out what we could do to help support. So I'm going to kick it back to Parnisha. And yeah, just want to thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for being here.
And
you guys are amazing. I'm so glad I can see you from here. Thank you so much.
Be warriors for Love Child. Go tell your people.
Are you a warrior for Love Child?
I'm a warrior for Love Child.
I'm a warrior for Love Child.
Bring it. I'm a warrior for Love Child. Okay, Parnisha.
So thank you so much, everybody, for this has been amazing. I think this has been one of the most incredible virtual things I've ever seen and witnessed. And I thank everybody for just tuning in at this time. We have had to coordinate this across 3 time zones, and it went beautifully. And I definitely want to thank Nikki for introducing me to Lisbeth and Erica, who have just been absolute saviors and absolute true friends, true, beautiful humans in this time where we need beautiful humans to like react to so many different things that are going on. And so I'm gonna put this out here so you can see my background.
Lord, what are you doing?
So
it's crazy.
You have no control at this point because I'm virtual. And see, Lisbeth is putting up so that's what the book looks like. It is something that is so beautiful, obviously, because of the words. The book is available wherever you choose to shop. We have no favorites because we know people want to do independent. You can contact the Independent Bookseller Association to get books delivered to you curbside in this time of quarantine. You can contact Amazon that is lifted their non-essential situation and can get books, Barnes & Noble. But you can come to us directly, Northwestern University Press. You can just Google us and we'll get you a book immediately, absolutely immediately. Our warehouse opened on Monday and I'm really proud and happy. So I'm having wine for that we can ship out books. But you can get the book any place, anywhere that you shop and want to get your books and want to teach this book. It's an important book to teach in terms of memoir, in terms of poetry, in terms of artifacts, archives, all those different things. And so I want to close this out. And if you want to contact Nikki to do a virtual something, she's got the taste of the bug.
No, she's not doing it, sorry.
We'll talk a little bit more about that. You should contact her through her website, nikkifinney.net.
I miss you guys in real life. That's what I want to say.
But we're going to do one last thing collectively. Emily, unleash the audio and visual, please. Everybody take their audio and video off.
I have to go online. Hang online for a minute. I'm a warrior for Love Child. Yeah. So much love.
Hey, Nikki.
Air horn.
Lovely. Thank you.
Love you, Nikki.
Everybody.
Stars. All the stars.
Congratulations.
Hi, thank you. Hanging up till everybody goes.
My coffee. I already ordered it.
Thank you. For Love Child. For Love Child. Love Child. It was amazing. All the claps.
Listen to me. Thank you.
Love you, girl.
We love you.
Thank you, Nikki.
Hey, Rhonda. Nikki.
Love Child. Child.
Got my coffee.
She wrote.
Best Zoom since quarantine started.
Best Zoom ever.
All the Zooms.
For the blood orange is you.
Crazy.
Oh, Nikki, you're my love child.
Girl.
Brilliant Zoom. Brilliant Zoom.
Anisha, you didn't talk about blood
Blood Orange.
Blood Orange.
Stay tuned tomorrow for an interview with Kelly Norman Ellis and Nikki Finney from Blood Orange. But Nikki already talked about Blood Orange review. So
Blood Orange or Love Orange?
Wait, what now?
Blood Orange.
What we gotta do?
Blood Orange.
Gotta go.
You unmuted us now. The hounds have released.
Guys, is it now?
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Are we done, Parnisha?
Hey, that's it.
We done now.
Conda. How you doing, Conda?
Hey, Elizabeth.
Hey.
Hey, Erica.
That's really nice.
Thanks, you guys.
No, I don't want to go. Good job, everybody.
No, you hang up. No, you hang up.
Hey, Lynn. Where did Nikki go?
Nobody wants to hang up. Hey, Lynn.
Nikki's gone.
Hey, Valerie. Is Valerie still here?
Nikki really left. Jackie,
Yeah.
Nikki left the room. She left the building.
Yeah, she really left.
Oh, man.
Love you guys.
All
right.
Ciao.
Hey, Valerie. Hey.
Get it.
Everyone. Be safe and happy.
Bye, everybody.
Get home
Bye-bye.
safe, everybody. Hey, Valerie.
Take care.
Up to you to pull the plug, sis.
Thanks, Parnisha. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Bye.
Thanks, Erica.
Okay,
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Lots of love.
Good night.
Bye
Good
bye.
night.
Bye. Peace and poetry.
Y'all be well.